So, Miss Verdie, Mr. Roy, thank y'all for having this conversation with me. I think that the issue of black women and childbirth is a real serious one. And so just tell us, you know, tell me your story uh, and we'll go from there with it.
Okay. So I got pregnant for Moxie through an IUD. So Moxie was just a miracle to begin with, to even be here. About 12 weeks through pregnancy, I found out that Moxie had a birth defect called an omphalocele. Long story short, her survival rate was like 60%, like less than 30%. So babies with this birth defect tend to have genetic disorders. We went through all the, blood work, amniocentesis, I think that's how you say it. And she was a baby that was normal. So she had an isolated omphalocele, which means that there was nothing genetically wrong with her, which for these babies, second miracle, because these babies tend to not survive, even going through, birth, right? Um, and so going through the 9 months of pregnancy, so she survived that. So like we're at miracle number two. And so on went through all my prenatal care, made sure that I went to all my appointments, saw specialists, met with a maternal fetal medicine doctor monthly, had a birth plan on what we were going to do when Moxie was born, went through an MRI just to make sure that her lungs were developed. We were told that everything was grossly normal. We have the paperwork to show it. So going into the hospital, Roy and I had no indication that Moxie was going to have anything wrong with her outside of the omphalocele. We knew that there could be a possibility that her lungs were underdeveloped. So which is normal for babies with omphalocele. So whenever we went to the cardiologist, whenever we went to the surgeon, maternal fetal medicine, we met with the neonatologist, I asked them specifically, I said, if her lungs are underdeveloped, what happens? And they said she would need an ECMO machine to rest her heart because it would help her lungs give her lungs time to develop, right? And so that way her heart wouldn't work as hard. And I said, well, do you all have an ECMO machine? They're like, no, we have an ECMO. There's two ECMO machines in a children's hospital in New Orleans. There's one at Ochsner. And I had been talking to my doctors about Texas Children because that was an option for me. I had family there. My brother has a home that he doesn't live in there close to the medical center. So I said, do I need to deliver my baby at Texas Children? I know they have their pulmonary department is top notch. They were like, no, we got it. We can handle it. Do not worry about it. If by any case she has underdeveloped lungs, which there's no indication that she does, she is going to be transported. Like we will transport her. It's not going to be a problem. And we're going to provide her ECMO.
And what happened when you got to delivery?
So we got to delivery. Moxie was intubated at birth. So she was having, from what we read in her records, it wasn't that her Apgar scores were low, like her breathing was like low. It was that they felt like her color was blue. Like they couldn't get her color to, that blueness to go away. So they intubated her, which is normal for babies with omphaloceles, right? So she was born at 1:11. They waited about maybe 30 minutes before I saw her. My mom was with me. Roy, being with COVID, only one person could be with you in the delivery room and one person could be with the baby. So we decided that Roy was going to go up and be with Moxie once she was delivered. So he was waiting. He was on call. Before I even had Moxie, I had met with a social worker. So we knew she was going to be in the NICU for a while. So I met with a social worker. We had a birth plan that Roy would go with her, being that it was COVID, and he would be with her, and then I would join him there. Like 2 weeks, maybe 4 to 2 weeks before, I called twice. I would talk to the social worker. She said, do not worry about it. We have it all under control. When Roy comes, he's going to be allowed into the NICU. So, long story short, I have Moxie. She actually cries, which is a good sign. Like it shows that she had some capacity of her lungs. I see her. They roll me to the room. I would say around 3:30, I begin to, like around 3 o'clock really, I'm like, can Roy come up? So they said, yes, he can come up to the NICU. My mom goes downstairs because she had a backpack for Moxie, so she was going to give it to Roy. Roy is met by officers at the door because he's telling them he's going to the NICU to see his daughter. My mom is pleading with them to allow Roy to go to the NICU. They call the NICU and they tell Roy that he cannot go up. My mom was given a band. As before I delivered Moxie, I stopped the whole room and I said, as they were giving my mom this band, I was like, are you sure you want to give my mom this band? Because her dad is coming up. Anyone in the delivery room could tell you that happened. They said, do not worry about it. Her dad will be able to go up. Your mom is just going to have the band. We'll give him a band whenever it's time for him to go up. So when he gets ready to go up, he's met by 2 to 3 officers, and they do not allow him up to see Moxie. So at this point, the social worker that I've been working with, I was trying to get in contact with her. I don't think I ever really got in contact with her. I don't know where she was. My nurse in the room was so upset that she said, I'm calling the head of nursing. We're going to get him to come up so he could be with your daughter. Now, granted, my daughter has a birth defect and follicle, like she needed someone there with her, right? So around 3 o'clock rolls around, that happens, 4, 5. So I'm asking my nurse, I'm like, when can he go up? So finally they get it approved. I said maybe around 5, 5:30. But when she calls the NICU, they tell her that Moxie is not ready. So I'm getting anxious. So I'm like, why is she not ready? At this point, I have not heard from a doctor. The social worker comes up. At this point, she basically just tells me that they're working on her to get her stable. 7 o'clock rolls around, 8 o'clock, I'm asking about when can her dad go up. I'm constantly asking. So around 8, 8:30, I'm like, I want to see my baby. Like, I want her dad up there. What is going on? So they tell me I can call the NICU and ask what's going on. So I called the NICU. They said the doctor would call me back. The doctor calls me back. She basically tells me that she had a hard time putting in a PICC line, which I think feeds the baby and things like that. That Moxie was really feisty, but we could go up now that she's stable. So at that point, I don't feel like I'm like, okay, she's okay, right? Because at no point did they tell me that she was critical. At no point did a neonatologist come and sit down and say, hey, your baby is critical, right? So we go into the NICU, which we knew this was, with her birth defect, these babies survive. I think Texas Children said it was a 93% survival rate with isolated follicles. So we go in, we see her. The nurse meets us and they tell us that she's stable, not to touch her too much. She gets agitated. Roy touches her. She kind of flints, like you could tell she didn't really like it. And we stay with her for a while. I told Roy to go home. I said, look, go home. I'm going to go back to my room. This is going to be a journey for us. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint, because we knew we were going to be in the NICU for a while. So around 11 o'clock, I get a call from a neonatologist. This is her second neonatologist. And she basically tells me that she has switched ventilators. So I'm like, well, why have you switched ventilators? She really did not give me an explanation. She just said, we think this is going to help her breathe better. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My mom literally gets me out of bed, bathes me, puts me in a wheelchair, and I just had a C-section, and wheels me to her room. So I get there, I ask the doctor. She said, well, at this point, she kind of mentions pulmonary hypertension. I immediately knew what that was, and I knew that she was going to have a hard time with her lungs and breathing. So I say to her, she was like, I called Children's Hospital. They're not going to take her for ECMO. So I'm sitting back and I'm like, what you mean they're not going to take her for ECMO? Our plan was if she had any type of hypertension, she would be able to go to a hospital with ECMO. So they're like, well, there's certain, at this point, I'm learning that there's certain criteria to get on ECMO. No one in my prenatal care told me that she would have to qualify for ECMO. If that was the case, I would have never had her at Woman's Hospital because they didn't have the life support that she needed.
But Woman's told you to have your baby there
Have her there.
because they could transfer her if anything happened.
Right. So I'm like confused. I'm asking this doctor, I'm like, why aren't they accepting her? She ignores me. She, it's like she didn't want to talk to me. And then I said, well, I want her transported to Texas Children.
Who is this doctor?
So this was a neonatologist. You want me to say her name?
Yeah.
Her name was Dr. Volker. I have a lot of issues with her, and it gets progressively worse as we go through the process. So she ignores me to the point where when I had to leave and go get medicine, I told my mom, I was like, I do not like her. She's not listening to me. I don't know what's going on with my baby. So I asked her, I said, I want her transported to Texas Children. She looks at me and says, no, we are not going to transport her to Texas Children because your insurance will not cover it. So I'm sitting back like.
So before you go there, what do you do for a living?
I'm an assistant principal in East Baton Rouge Parish.
What do you do, Mr. Roy?
Principal in Baker School System.
So you have
Private insurance.
So you have, say it again.
I have private insurance.
Okay.
Yes.
And the assumption was that your insurance would not cover it.
Correct.
Would your insurance have covered it?
Yes, because I checked before I even gave birth to Moxie. I even made sure I had the best medical plan because I knew that she was going to have, with her follicle, that she needed the best medical care. So at no point, I knew my insurance was going to transport if she needed it.
So the doctor tells you we're not going to transfer because your insurance might not cover it, and then what?
She tells me no, she's not doing that, and that they're going to look at in-state hospitals. So I'm like, well, what's the next step? She was like, well, I'm going to call Ochsner. And I was like, well, why didn't you call Ochsner when you called Texas Children? Like, why wouldn't you call them at the same time if you knew there was, if there was a criteria? So she's like, well, I'm going to call Ochsner. When I tell you, it's everything Black women talk about and how we're treated. It was, she ignored me. She did not listen to me. She did not answer my questions. It almost felt like I wasn't smart enough or I wasn't on her like level to even have a conversation, right? And so she basically tells me no, she's gonna call Ochsner. So this was around 6 o'clock in the morning. Roy hasn't made it yet. So I have to go to the room because I just had a C-section. I took medicine. I came right back. By the time I get back, we're with a new doctor, Dr. Mitchell. I see Mitchell before Roy sees Mitchell, and I asked the same thing. She's like, well, I called Ochsner, so we're going to see what Ochsner says. So at this point, I am just floored because I don't even understand why there's a conversation on her being transported because there was no conversation about this in my prenatal care. So I said, well, I want her transported to Texas Children. Can we do that? Because we're in the middle of COVID. I knew that New Orleans was just, at that point, numbers were super high. I was like, let's just transport her here. She was like, no, your insurance will not cover that. Your insurance does not cover out of state.
This is the second doctor?
Second doctor. Your insurance does not.
So Dr. Volker tells you no.
Dr. Mitchell tells me no.
And then Dr. Mitchell tells you no.
And she says, Dr. Mitchell goes a little bit more in detail, and she says, because your insurance won't cover out-of-state transport.
How does she know?
I have no idea.
Does your insurance cover out-of-state transport?
Yes, it covers out-of-state transport.
So what happens next?
So she tells me no, so they contact Ochsner. At this point, Roy comes in, and Roy at this point is asking questions. He was like, why are they not transporting Moxie, right? She's like, well, we need to get like a blood oxygen level from her. We need to, what she told you it was a ABG. And then something with her neck, like an artery they needed.
Yes, they needed to see the size of her artery to make sure it was the size that would fit the ECMO machine. Something I never heard of. Moxie was a full-term baby. Mm-hmm. Almost 5 5 pounds.
Yes.
Um, I'm still blown away with that sorry excuse they gave me to the reason why. We had already did our research on transferring babies as far as being put on ECMO machine. You had preemies that was way smaller than Moxie that had been transported. I am still waiting on that answer. Why our baby wasn't transported? They let her lay there and die. At 1:11, she had Moxie. I didn't see my baby until 8 p.m. I could have been that advocate for my baby, but they denied me that access. And that's the reason why they denied me, Gary. Because they knew I was going to fight for her to be transported. Where did the lack of transparency fall? It failed with the communication with her prenatal doctor, who promised us that there would be transparency. After her delivery, there wasn't any transparency. I don't even think the doctors met. And to be honest with you, the lady she's talking about, Dr. Volker, she didn't have any notes to give to Dr. Mitchell. She had our baby for over 12 hours. And we asked her, when I asked her, what were her notes? She informed me that she didn't have any notes due to the fact that she was too busy taking care of our baby. And I still don't have the answers today.
So, Dr. Volker, Dr. Mitchell tell you no,
They tell me no.
and it's all insurance conversation.
It's all insurance conversations.
And then what happens next?
So the cardiologist comes in. The cardiologist I met before Moxie was born, who we talked about an ECMO machine. She comes in. She looks extremely nervous. And she's whispering to Dr. Mitchell. And then Roy's asking questions. Roy said, "Is it her heart?" And she looks at Roy and she says, "It is not her heart." She said, "It is her lungs." And she was like, she basically told Dr. Mitchell, "You all need to get an ABG right away." And I think the ABG was so important because they needed it for the ECMO to see if she qualified. What we're learning now is that see if she would qualify for the ECMO. So then,
But this was on an in-state transfer, not if it was on to Texas Children.
This was not even, they didn't even acknowledge my request for Texas Children. This was for the in-state transfer. So around noon, this happened all around noon. I would say about 12:30, my social worker comes in. So when you go into the NICU, you are given a social worker. I met with this social worker probably at about 28 weeks. So I knew who she was. We talked. Like that's how we.
Pause for 2 seconds.
Yeah. That is how much care and thoughtfulness we took into account of Moxie being here. Like we did everything we were supposed to do. So the social worker comes in and I was like, why? And Roy and I are sitting there watching, like looking at Moxie. And I said, why are they not transporting my baby? I'm asking for them to go to Texas Children. What is the problem? And she says, oh, they think you're on Medicaid. And I said, what? Why would they think I'm on Medicaid? And she says, well, 70% of people in here are on Medicaid. And so Medicaid will stop you from out-of-state transfer. So they need to make sure that they look at in-state first. I said, well, that's a problem because I am a private insured person. And I literally said this, it doesn't matter if she has Medicaid or not. I said, if she is sick, she needs to be transported. And so I think she saw the agitation maybe at that point. She really doesn't say much after that. But what I do know is I think that is when she went back and was like, she went to tell the doctors that we were privately insured, right? So at this point, Dr. Mitchell comes back and they're looking for so they're trying to transport her to Ochsner. So she comes to me and she says, we think she's doing better. We're going to keep her here. We're going to, she's stable. We think she's getting a little bit better. So we're going to keep her here. I'm like, are you sure? I was like, at this point, again, I say, I want her transported. no, let's just keep her here. We're going to keep her here. We're going to see how it goes. And I was like, she's like, we're still in conversations with Oshner. So again, I asked for transport, nothing. So I would say probably around 5 o'clock. So this happened. This was all around noon. So they made the decision they was going to keep her at Woman's, despite our constant acts for transport at this point. So a new doctor comes in, Dr. Soto comes in. And I literally am watching he and Dr. Mitchell, and you could tell he is angry. Like he is upset. Like they are like having a not so nice discussion. And so he comes back in and he says, "We need to get your baby's ABG right away." He was like, "I'm sending in a cardiologist and we're going to see, he's the best, and we're going to see if he could get her ABG, which is like a blood oxygen from what we are learning." And so he was like, "I'm going to send y'all out the room." So we set out the room for about an hour. We meet with the social worker. She sits with us. I'm like, I don't understand why she's still not transported. Didn't I like ask her? And she's like, "Well, we're just going to see about getting the blood oxygen levels. The cardiologist is really good." So about an hour later, he comes out. He pulls us in a room. This is the first time that a doctor actually sat down with us.
And how long was this?
Moxie was born at 1:11 on April 22nd. This was around 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock on April 23rd, in that evening. So a full 24 hours have gone by. We're progressively watching her die. That's exactly what we did. So he pulls us in a room and he says, I asked him, I said, "What is going on? Like, I don't understand why y'all are not." One doctor's telling me one doctor's telling Roy she needs an artery, another one. Like, no one can explain to us what it is that she needs.
At the beginning of birth, they knew she had pulmonary hypertension. At the beginning of birth, they should have transported her. That was the communication. That was the transparency. That was the plan.
But they didn't think y'all had insurance.
But they didn't think we had insurance.
Private insurance.
And it shouldn't matter. Now, I will say, the head of nursing, when we met with them, they informed us. She stated that it didn't matter what insurance Verdie had. If the parents asked for transport, she should have been transported.
So the hospital admits this to you.
The hospital admits it.
What we found out, I'm going to go back to the story. So basically this doctor looks at Roy and I and says, "With COVID, this is your options. Your baby will get put in an ambulance, which we're pretty sure she will die. So you all have the option to basically let her die in an ambulance by herself, or she will die here with you at this hospital." So like, as a parent, what is your option? So she died at midnight, around midnight. So, and as she was dying, this doctor looks at us and says, as she's dying, as the nurses are working on her, he comes and kneels to us and whispers, "We all know this is pulmonary hypertension. We don't think an autopsy is needed. Would you agree?" As our baby is dying. So she dies. And on the way to bury her, I couldn't even process it. I think Roy had processed it the whole way. He knew something was wrong. So as we were going to bury her, he looks at me and he says, "We need to talk about what happened." So we talk about it. My doctor, my OBGYN, calls me and she says to me a day after we bury her, about a week later, she's like, "What happened?" Because she said she's never lost a baby with an omphalocele. Like, that has never happened. And so I told her the story, and she put me in contact with the social worker. So we had our first meeting with the 4 doctors that had Moxie. As we're getting the records, I mean, we have resources. So we had, we were able to have a nurse practitioner look at the records, a doctor, a respiratory therapist. And so as we're looking at it, what we know is that Moxie was born at 1:11. They diagnosed her with pulmonary hyperplasia at 3 o'clock. They knew her lungs were underdeveloped at 3 o'clock and did not think it was important enough to sit down and have a conversation with us.
Until the next day.
Until the next night when she was dying. They was telling us we had to choose if she was going to die in an ambulance or at the hospital. And so we go and we talk, like, we did not back down. We went in the first meeting, and I say, I tell her, we meet with the doctors, and so the main thing is, why wasn't she transported? So Dr. Soto says, I said, I asked for Texas Children. I am the parent. Why wasn't she transported? So what they basically tried to tell us was that they felt like she was going to not survive transport. And I was like, that was not your decision to make. That was ours, right? He was like, well, we'd have to put her in an ambulance, and lies. It was all lies, because children are not put in ambulance to go to Texas Children. They are flown. They have like what they call a kangaroo crew. Had they called, they would have picked her up, put her on an ECMO machine from the hospital, and flown her to Texas Children. So I asked them, I said, did you ever call Texas Children? You know what they told us? They never called. They never called. And I said, so.
And you specifically asked them.
I specifically asked for it. Specifically. Like, Gary, I said, I told the lady, I said, my brother has a home there. This is actually a better place. Like, Roy and I could stay there, and we could go back and forth to the hospital. No, your insurance will not cover it.
So you're meeting with the doctors tell you that they didn't call Texas Children. Mm-hmm. And then you find out also that the Dr. Volker has no notes.
Right.
What else did you discover in this first conversation with the doctors?
We discovered they showed us her, they showed us like an x-ray, which made me even more concerned, because if you look at it, you could tell that she needed more support with her lungs and breathing. So the idea of, and let me be clear, I didn't ask for transport just for ECMO. I asked for transport. I didn't want her at the hospital, period, because I knew that they had a better pulmonology center at Texas Children, right? So it's more than just the ECMO. So what they tried to tell us was that they didn't accept her with the ECMO, which we have no documentation whatsoever.
But how can they say that they wouldn't accept her if they never called them?
Because they said the other hospitals didn't accept her, which we're still uncertain. I haven't seen any documentation with that. Another red flag was Dr. Volker said that she met with us that night. So she looked at us in our face and said, I met with y'all that night. You remember? So Roy and I are like, you did not meet with us. What are you talking about? And she's like, yes, I did. And we were like, go pull the tapes. You did not meet with us. So she lied about meeting with us that night, because she was because she knows it's bull crap that you have a sick baby that critical in a hospital and you didn't even sit down and meet with the parents.
So you go from one meeting, which leads to another meeting with hospital executives.
We meet with the head of neonatology, Dr. Spadell. So he comes in. It's a lot of things I feel like he didn't know. I don't think he recognized that. Let me go back. So as I'm leaving, we were leaving the first meeting. The social worker comes up to us and says, well, she comes to me. Roy's walking to the elevator, and she whispers and she says, I knew you had private insurance. The nighttime doctor read your Moxie's chart wrong. So I look at her and I'm like, what do you mean she read Moxie's chart wrong? She's like, well, she just read her chart wrong, but I knew you had private insurance. So we move into the next meeting with the head of neonatology. We meet with Dr. Volker and Dr. Valenke, because even with Dr. Valenke, she was a doctor that took in Moxie. She knew Moxie was critical at 3 o'clock. No conversation with us as parents. A phone call that I had to initiate.
What's the color of each of these doctors?
Dr. Valenke is Indian. Dr. Volker is a white woman. Dr. Mitchell is a white woman. And Dr. Saluto, he looks like a white man. I'm not sure, but he looks like a white man.
But no black doctors.
Not one black doctor. We did not see one black nurse. The only black person that we saw in that NICU was a custodian. That's it. Not one. Not one. So we go on to the second meeting. And the first meeting, Dr. Soto told us, well, it would have cost y'all. So when I asked him about transport to Texas Children, he said, that could have cost y'all $30,000, to transport her. So I'm sitting back like, what makes you think we don't have $30,000 to transport our child? We have resources. We had $30,000 if we needed to transport our child. And it just goes to speak to, you're still racially profiling us, basically.
And classism.
And classism. You're still doing it even after her death. And so we go into the meeting with Dr. Spadell. He was alarmed that the Dr. Volker didn't have any notes. He actually looked for the notes, and what he did find was she had addendums to the notes. She also copied and pasted another Dr. Valenke's notes from earlier in the parental section. Like those notes were copied and pasted, and she added a sentence. So I said, Dr. Valenke, isn't this your notes? And she's like, yes, those are my notes. So I think she was just trying to put something in the system. They also lied about meeting with us. So she said she was in constant contact, if you read the notes, that she met with us, talked to us about the pulmonary hypertension, which was a lie. She never did. So then we go back to, not satisfied with that meeting. We were supposed to meet with the CEO. At this point, I have filed a complaint. And that complaint basically said that we were racially profiled, that we were discriminated against in the hospital, and that there was a bias, whether it was unconscious or conscious, right? So the CEO writes a letter back. She said she would be happy to meet with us and discuss it. When it came time for the meeting and I specifically asked for her, she did not show up to the meeting. What she did was she sent the head of nursing and I think the lady right underneath head of nursing. So that's where we begin to discuss what happened.
And you have a recording of that conversation that I
Yes.
listened to, right?
Yes.
And so tell me, in that conversation, there was something I heard where I don't know who was speaking, whether she was the head of nursing or the lady under her, but she admits to them having racial issues within their organization or having an issue with unconscious bias or something to that level.
She acknowledges that there is unconscious bias and that they have what I felt like a lack of training for the staff. So what she did talk about, because I did discuss how we did not see one black doctor or nurse in that hospital. So what she did say is that they recognize that there is an issue when it comes to people of color being hired at that hospital, that as of a few months ago, she was in charge of working on more of a diversity plan, how they were going to tackle unconscious bias and racism within the hospital. So they clearly understand that there is an issue there, to the point where she said, would you help me with this? So I'm sitting back and I'm like, it's 2020 and all the black women that you service in this hospital and you don't have a plan. It struck me. I think I was kind of caught off guard because I wasn't expecting that, right? She did acknowledge, so when I said, if your baby had an omphalocele pulmonary hyperplasia, would you leave your baby in this hospital? And what did she say? No. She said, no, I wouldn't. In tears. I would not. They apologized for what happened to us in the hospital. It was kind of like an apology.
So what do you want to see happen? As as a black woman who has experienced what you've experienced, first, what does it make you feel, right? And what do you want to see happen?
You read about this all the time, right? I read about it before I went in with Moxie. You hear stories. You never in a million years think this was going to happen. Like I thought they were going to kill me. I went in the hospital fully prepared to die. Like, I went in the hospital prepared to die because I understood the gravity of Black women dying, right? I never thought in a million years they would kill my baby. I never thought it, because how do you do that to a baby? Like, I never realized it. And like, I never thought it. And I also thought that I prepared really well for her. Like, Roy and I did everything we were supposed to do for her. And so as a Black woman, it's hurtful. It's everything they say it is. It's exactly how they explain it. It's exactly how it was treated. It's exactly, it's so, I don't know. I just can't even, I guess, put it in words. It's everything you read is true. Everything someone tells you when this happens to them, it is true. Like, they don't listen. They don't think you're important enough. They don't think you're educated enough, you know? And so to even communicate or have a conversation, they ignore you when you ask for transport, when you tell them something is wrong. And so it's everything that is explained, and it's hurtful and it's scary, right? Any Black woman going in the hospital, I would say, you need to be aware and you need to understand your birth plan. You need to have someone with you who can advocate for you, right? That's outside of like a loved one.
Do you think Black women should be concerned if they're considering having a baby at woman?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if a friend called you and said she was pregnant and she was going to have a baby at woman's, what would you tell her?
To go to Ochsner. That's what I would tell them. I actually had a coworker come to me, and she was scared to death, and she was about to have a baby, and we were kind of talking about what happened to me, and I told her, I said, scream till the top of your lungs. Do not just, I don't care, you call the CEO, if they have to arrest you, whatever it is, you make sure that you do not be ignored in that hospital. Like, you do everything in your power to advocate and do what you need to do for yourself and your baby. Like, this is a real conversation I'm having with someone who's about to give birth, right? It is so real. And the problem is, no one talks about it, right? You hear a few stories here and there. Like, this happens all the time. And I sit back and I think about, what about those young girls, young women on Medicaid in that hospital? Like, I'm treated like this and I have private insurance. Like, what kind of treatment are people getting there? Like, that's my question. I can articulate myself well. I can ask questions. How many women have left that hospital feeling that something was wrong, but they couldn't express it in words? You know what I'm saying? Like, how many people has this happened to?
The lady that walked us out, she informed us. She said there has been complaints after complaints. She said, I'm glad that you all had the courage to come in here so that they can hear it from you all and not from me. So the lady that walked us out informed us that this is happening. It has happened, Gary, numerous of times. And those people complaints have been unheard. And she say she just thank us for having the courage to come in and express our concerns.
Yeah.
So continue with, what do you want to see happen?
Let me. Gary, I want to see some accountability. Yeah. None of those doctors have been held accountable. None of them. You get a letter from head of nursing stating that, well, we show sympathy and gratitude and all this here food. We don't want to hear that. We want some accountability. At the end of the day, she's clearing the nurses. She didn't mention the doctors. It was strictly the nurses, am I correct? Yeah. The doctors. That's who touched our baby. That's who, Every doctor in there need to be held accountable. And still hadn't gotten it. I still hadn't got an answer to my question. Why wasn't my baby transport? Why wasn't I let in NICU? 1:11 to almost, it was 8, close to 9 o'clock when we signed in. If I would have known, Gary, if I would have known that my baby had pulmonary hypotension at 3, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Because there is no way in hell I'd have left her in that hospital. There's no way. But me being denied access, I couldn't be an advocate. And when we did get in there at 9, we only seen the nurse.
No doctor.
And all she can inform us, your baby is stable right now. She's been through a lot. Don't touch her too much. And still didn't know that she had pulmonary hypertension.
But they knew this at 3 o'clock.
But they knew it at 3.
They knew it at 3 o'clock.
And you didn't find out until almost.
We found out the next day at about the last doctor informed me.
Well, they kind of mentioned it in the morning, like that morning. So it was around 6:30. But they never talked about like the critical status of it. Like there was never a conversation like this could kill her. Like it was never that. There was never that conversation until 6 o'clock that evening where he was like, she's really critical.
So you want accountability and you want to see what else happened.
What I was saying was there need to be change. Afro-Americans need to see people like them.
Yeah.
They need to see more Afro-Americans in the hospitals.
As doctors?
As doctors, as nurses. Because it was like we didn't know who to turn to. Yeah. And you get so frustrated, Gary, because they're not giving you answers. Mm-hmm. Like she said, they're ignoring you. It's like, what do you do? It's like, what do you do? Do I act a fool in here to get arrested? That's probably something they wanted me to do, but I felt like I couldn't be an advocate for my child if I do that. So you try to follow the protocol and procedures of the hospital, but they don't work for us. Yeah. Nothing that we went through at Women's Hospital worked for us. I do not want to see this happen to another mother or another father or another family. Her mom is super bitter over this. Yeah. And I am too, because I have 4 boys and this was my little girl. Now they don't have that baby sister. And I feel so bad for Verdie because Moxie was a twin. She lost one early. And being Moxie was the fighter. I'm talking about during the pregnancy, I was like, girl, you get ready, because God, at least she gonna be something serious. So when they came back and they say, well, she was feisty. It took about 2 hours for them to get the PEC line in. And I was like, okay, she's feisty. If Verdie's saying she's feisty, that means she's healthy. A sick baby can't be feisty. So I'm like, okay, good. But nowhere did pulmonary hypertension come into play.
Or hyperplasia.
Mm-hmm. It puzzled me that the head of nursing would state in our meeting that those conditions that our baby had, that's what the ECMO machine was for.
You don't get to kill my baby in a hospital and tell me you're sorry. You don't get to discriminate against me. You don't get to think that, peg me as being on Medicaid. You don't get to not listen to me. And then I have a baby. Like, this will affect the rest of our lives. Like, there is not a holiday, a birthday that will go by. Like, we live with grief. And so it is not, sorry is not okay. You know what I'm saying? And then for you not to even acknowledge it, right? I had a doctor look at me and say, we treat all people the same. And I'm like, and that's the problem, because you really believe that, right? That I know you don't have no any type of training on racism, systematic racism, because you would know better than to say that, you know? And so I think that's my biggest, you don't get to say I'm sorry, and like you need to do a better job in sitting down and talking with us on how we're gonna make this better so this does not happen again, right? Like I think a lot of times we live in this, like we're traumatized. Like I cannot even go to my OBGYN at the Women's Center because I can't even go there. I'm so traumatized. Like it is, I don't think people understand the gravity. Like we lost a baby. So you sitting next to me telling me you're sorry. What am I going to do with a sorry? I think that's my biggest piece. Like, I think it's just the acknowledgement of what they did was wrong.
And they haven't changed any policies as you know it.
No, no, not that I know of. They said they were working on a, as of now, the head of nursing said it was her job to work on some type of training for hospital staff. And they also recognized that they needed to hire more people of color.
So you want to see more doctors?
I want to see more doctors, more nurses. I think we need serious training. And let me be clear, I've met with head of executives. There was not one black person in the room. So I think there is a bigger problem of who's running the hospital.
What about social workers?
Social workers, absolutely. Because I feel like my social worker completely missed it, right? Like there should have not been even a gap of what my insurance was, right? Even if I had Medicaid, she should have been an advocate for me in that hospital, right? So I think it's all across the board. I think Roy and I deserve a conversation and honesty about what really happened to our daughter instead of lies and cover up. I think that is another, I want to know, I want them to be honest, and I want them to be sincere when they tell us what all transpired and how they're going to make that better and how they're going to be better.
I am beyond sorry that this is the circumstances in which we have to have this conversation, but I will do whatever I can to illuminate this issue because I agree with you. Women's Hospital does need more African American people working in their organization, as well as I think that this issue is clearly a real issue for Black women in America.
Yeah.
And if we don't begin to tell these stories and illuminate this conversation, then we're never going to fix the problem.
Right.
You know.
And even as I was talking to the head of nursing, I said, an educated woman like me is still 3 times more likely to either die, or our babies 2 to 3 times more likely to die than our babies to die than a white woman that is uneducated, that had poor prenatal care.
How many degrees do you have?
2.
How many do you have?
3.
5 degrees in this household.
Yeah.
Both of you work for the education system, private insurance, and this is still the outcome.
This is the outcome. This is the outcome.
We're going to push the issue.
Yeah. It's happening every day.